Way back in Skypiea, we were first introduced to these winged people, Shandians, Skypians, and Burkans. At first, the wings seemed like just a minor adaptation to living high in the clouds. Yet we find out that Shandians actually came from a regular island on the Blue Sea. Then with Enel is when the situation gets explained, yet somehow becomes even more confusing. All these winged people originally came from the moon. Enel himself goes up to the moon, and sure enough, he finds pictures on the walls of this ancient civilization depicting the descent of these three groups of winged people from the moon. So when hundreds of chapters later, we're introduced to the winged Lunarian race, with Luna being just the Latin name of our moon, we all thought, oh, of course, the Lunarians came from the moon like all these other winged guys. So why is it exactly that no image of these dark-skinned, black-winged people can be seen among the other winged people on the moon paintings? The short answer is that Lunarians were not really so different from these other winged people and likely derived from them, only acquiring their characteristic black color, white hair, and blazing backs on Earth. For the long answer, we'll have to take a deep dive into Oda's inspirations, both from mythology and from literature, for creating Montblanc Noland and his story with Calgara and the Shandians, the Ancient Kingdom, Adam and Eve trees, the Red Line, and more. And you'll see how this will also allow us to unveil not only how Lunarians got their distinct appearance and powers, but also why Treasure Tree Adam's Wood is so strong, why are Adam and Eve trees so incredibly large, and also gigantism in general, including the giants of Elbaf, the gigantism we see in the plant and animal life of Upper Yard, in the kids of Punk Hazard, or why Lunarians seem to be so much larger than your average winged people, and much more. This here is the first video of part 3 of GUST, my unified mega theory on One Piece powers, and in a way my theory on the very inner workings, the metaphysics of the world of One Piece. The big boy of part 3 will be devil fruits. I'm finally going to explain them, what they are, how they were created, why they behave the way they do, what is awakening, why haki is their natural counter, what it means for an object to eat a devil fruit, etc. But part 3 will be about much more than devil fruits. Lunarians, Adam and Eve trees, Klabauterman, Black Blades, the Seraphim, Green Blood, Smile Devil Fruits, Emeth the Ancient Robot, just what the hell is really going on with Sun God Nika and Luffy's Fruit, the energy source Vegapunk spoke of, the Mother Flame, a lot of other Vegapunk tech such as light and gravity manipulation, etc. This will also be the most lore heavy part of GUST, and fittingly this video will be the most lore heavy of them all, because we will start by talking about the Ancient Kingdom and the Lunarians, where it was, its inhabitants, how Lunarians came into being and how their powers work, and we will find this out primarily by looking towards Skypiea. I really recommend, if you haven't, to check out part 1 of GUST, specifically the Kitetsu video, because Kitetsu, the metal, is gonna be the key to many of the things I'm gonna be saying here. The Ancient Kingdom is easily one of the aspects of the story most theorized about by the community, and one I think the community has done its best work on as far as theory crafting goes. Unlike Haki, that is, where the community has by and large had no idea of what the hell they're doing. So some of the stuff I will be mentioning about lore have been theorized in the One Piece community for a while, to the point where I don't even know who the original theorists were, but you will see some similarities here and there to some stuff I'll say, to some stuff that has been said by fellow YouTubers Yuderon or Hidden Island, for example. Yet I do think I have the keys here to connect everything properly together, otherwise I wouldn't be making this video in the first place. Anyways, let's get to it already. Montblanc Noland, who reached Jaya roughly 400 years before the current story, is partially inspired by Gulliver's Travels, a book written by Irish author Jonathan Swift, originally published in 1726 under the name Travels into Several Remote Nations of the World, in 4 parts, by Lemuel Gulliver, first a surgeon and then a captain of several ships. A title that would even put modern isekai novels to shame. For one, just like the protagonist of the book, Lemuel Gulliver, was originally a surgeon who became a captain of a ship. Montblanc Noland was a botanist, particularly focused on using his knowledge to cure and prevent diseases like tree fever, which he cured the Shandians of, and an explorer, captain of his ship, and later admiral of a fleet of several ships. More than that, Noland's travel to Greenbit, near Dressrosa, meeting the Tontatas, a race of dwarfs who are excessively naive and trusting, is inspired by Gulliver's travel to the island country of Lilliput, the Lilliputians being a race of tiny people no taller than 6 inches or 15 centimeters, who overemphasized trivial matters. By the way, Gulliver also traveled to a country of giants, Brobdingnag, where he, instead, was the tiny one, so I'm pretty confident that we will learn that Noland has been to Elbaf as well. Anyways, Gulliver travels also to the islands of Balnibarbi and Laputa. To the Hispanohablantes among the viewers, yes, I know what Laputa sounds like, as likely did Swift himself, as he was fluent in Spanish. Though I don't think he expected his joke to make its way into a massive anime Studio Ghibli film 260 years later. Anyways, the islands of Balnibarbi and Laputa were strongly connected, so to say. Laputa was a circular island that sat on top of an adamantine base that flew high in the sky, using magnetic levitation. The society of Laputa was extremely scientifically advanced and devoted itself to astronomy, mathematics, music, yet were incapable of using any of it to practical ends. Laputa ruled the much larger Balnibarbi from the sky. The society of Balnibarbi, by contrast, was but a sad reflection of Laputa. The people were hungry and poverty-stricken. The houses were poorly built. Their farming techniques, in Gulliver's words, were unaccountable. Balnibarbi, like Laputa, devoted a great amount of manpower and resources to scientific research, yet their methods, beliefs, and hypotheses were utterly insane. They conducted research on schemes like substituting silkworms with spiders, or using hogs to plow the land for farming. The reason for this is that some people from Balnibarbi had traveled up to Laputa and, being inspired by what they saw and learned, returned in high spirits to revolutionize the way things were done at Balnibarbi. Yet they had only acquired a very little smattering of mathematics, and in their volatile spirits, mixed with poor understanding of the science, the projects they conducted only made the way things were managed in Balnibarbi worse. So when we look towards Jaya, the full Jaya, where Noland first arrives, meeting a people plagued by disease and weird superstition that had them seeing large beasts as gods, natural disasters as the wrath of said gods, and their solutions in things like rituals and human sacrifice, notice the big circular eye hole mirroring the eye of the skull where the city of Shandora was, because high above it in the sky was once an extremely scientifically advanced island of sorts, and just like the terrible schemes of Balnibarbi were a reflection of the science of Laputa, the superstition of Shandora, be it sacrificing human lives to the sun god, or believing that the spirits of their ancestors resided inside these white trees, was a poor reflection of the science of the ancient kingdom. After all, Shandora was named after Chandra, the Hindu name for the moon and the god that personified it. And the light of the moon is merely the dim reflection of the light of the sun. The sun and moon being born out of the two eyes of a deity is a surprisingly common motif in various religions throughout the world. In Shinto, the native religion of Japan, the kami, gods, who personified the sun and moon, were created when the kami Izanagi cleansed himself in a river, at least according to the narrative in the Kojiki. Amaterasu, the kami of the sun, was created when Izanagi washed his left eye. Tsukuyomi, the kami of the moon, when he washed his right eye. In the ancient Egyptian religion, the right eye of Ra Horus, a duo of deities frequently equated with each other and later even merged into the deity Ra Horakti, was equated with the sun. The left eye of Ra Horus was equated with the moon. In Norse mythology, the earth and the heavens were created from the remains of Ymir, the primordial Jotnar, the giants who antagonized the Norse gods. In the Poetic Edda, it's stated that from Ymir's flesh the earth was formed, and from his bones the hills, the heaven from the skull of that ice-cold giant, and from his blood the sea. You see, the skull that makes up Jaya, that was in fact in heaven when it was in Skypiea, is like Ymir's skull. And like the real heavens, it contains the sun and the moon, in this case as its right and left eyes. Yet I'm bringing Norse mythology specifically here for a different reason. Let's do a little detour. I promise you it's all connected. In Onigashima, we find out that on the red line once stood what was called Kami no Kuni, the country of gods, that according to Marco, who apparently learned this from Whitebeard, was populated by the Lunarians. The Lunarians being this race of winged people, like the Shandians, Skypians, and Burkans, yet having dark skin, black wings much bigger than the other winged races, silvery white hair, and the ability to conjure flames. Above the red line now only resides Holy Land Marijoa, the capital of the world government, and place of residence of the celestial dragons, now called the gods of the world, and also having their own Kami no Chi, domain of the gods that they inhabit. So I think it's safe to say that this country of gods of the Lunarians once stood roughly where Holy Land Marijoa now stands. You know what else is there? Sunlight Tree Eve. The connection of the Lunarians to Sunlight Tree Eve can be seen, for example, in King's tree branch tattoo on his face and in his birth name Albert or Aruberu, which seems to come from the Latin for tree, Arubor, or in Japanese phonetics, Aruboru. The enormous Sunlight Tree Eve, much like its counterpart Treasure Tree Adam, which is likely this tree we see in Elbaf, is based partially on Yggdrasil, the cosmological tree of ancient Norse myth, around which all else exists. In Norse mythology, there are actually descriptions of other immense cosmological trees. Though they are very likely just different names for Yggdrasil, they might have served as inspiration for having more than one world tree. Anyways, on the higher branches of Yggdrasil is the most common location ascribed to Asgard, one of the 9 worlds of Norse cosmology, and the land of the Aesir, the principal pantheon of gods in Norse mythology. So, fittingly, the country of gods was high up the branches of Sunlight Tree Eve. Lower, near the base of the tree, yet not down at the roots, was Midgard, the home of mortal man, the world as people inhabit. It's also common to see depictions of Yggdrasil's roots holding some of the 9 worlds as if holding immense bubbles, which might have been the inspiration for Fishman Island inside of an immense bubble at the roots of Sunlight Tree Eve. Taking the parallels even further, around Yggdrasil there were 2 immense serpents, Jormungandr, who circled the entirety of Midgard, biting its own tail, and Nidhogg, though really he was more like a dragon, who gnawed at Yggdrasil's roots. Jormungandr and Nidhogg together probably inspired the Red Line, which is probably the great serpent soaked in blood Dori and Broggi said was the one thing they couldn't pierce, the giants of Elbaf being inspired by Norse myth and the Red Line being indestructible and all. Just like Jormungandr, the Red Line circles the entire globe as if biting its own tail, and at the same time gnaws at Eve, like Nidhogg gnaws at the roots of Yggdrasil. At Reverse Mountain, there are these stone gates with carvings of this weird scaly creature. It probably doesn't quite strike you as a serpent initially, but specifically with the twirly shape of its snout, it does weirdly resemble very old depictions of Jormungandr from runestones and old manuscripts, for example. Just like at the base of Yggdrasil was Midgard, the realm of mankind, just like at the base of Treasure Tree Adam is Elbaf, at the base of a Sunlight Tree Eve, before the tree was enveloped by the Red Line, there was once a land of a non-godlike people. A land with people with a distinct yet similar culture to the one of the Lunarians above, sharing, for example, their characteristic tattoos. And that land was, of course, Jaya. See, I'm not saying that this big hole was once a land where the ancient kingdom was taken out of, but rather the hole is where the trunk of Sunlight Tree Eve once stood, before Joy Boy likely dragged Jaya away from Sunlight Tree Eve, and likely rubberized the land as well when he did it, so these two pointy bits wouldn't break off when he pulled the island away from the tree. You get the point. You see, just like Chandra is a smaller reflection of the ancient kingdom, when it was in Skypiea, it was called God's land, yet God didn't reside in it, but merely ruled it from above. For he resided high up on Giant Jack, the giant beanstalk. The giant beanstalk that rose from the center of Chandra, the skull's right eye, is the parallel, the smaller reflection to Sunlight Tree Eve that rose from the skull's left eye, with the giant Jack being a reference to Jack and the Beanstalk, in which the protagonist, Jack, climbs a giant beanstalk up into a land above the clouds where a giant lived. You get it, giant Elbaf. It also serves to further draw parallels between Jaya and Elbaf. Both were, or in Elbaf's case still is, the Midgards, the land masses at the base of their respective world trees, Eve and Adam. Both had the theme of gigantism, with the trees and the animals gigantifying when Upper Yard was sent into Skypiea, and with both likely having been visited by Montblanc Noland. Funnily, Greenbit, despite its tiny underground population, also had gigantic flora above ground. So if the Shandians and Lunarians were neighbors, and even shared a culture to some extent, how did Lunarians turn out to look so different from Shandians? The key is in something that some of you had actually already realized way back when I released my first video of GUST, the Kitetsu theory. Eve's roots reach all the way to the bottom of the sea, and then seem like they just keep going into the seafloor even further down. How low do they reach exactly? Well, Yggdrasil's roots reached even down to Helheim, the Norse hell. So how low do Eve's roots go? Of course, all the way down to hell. Given the Straw Hats ran into some underwater volcanoes near Fishman Island, you can't go much lower than the seafloor without reaching magma. And what is in the magma of the One Piece world? The metal capable of storing and channeling ki, of controlling its stability, the metal otherwise known as Pyroboy, Kitetsu. Sunlight Tree Eve, and likely Treasure Tree Adam as well, had its roots reach so deep into the earth, it started to nurture itself with magma, and so with the Kitetsu that exists in it. The Kitetsu becomes part of its body, present from its lowest roots to its highest branches, and even present in the fruit it bore. And from eating these fruits, the Lunarians had Kitetsu become part of their bodies as well, and over generations they were transformed by it. There's a parallel here to Emberlad from Lost Flashback, so it's probably no coincidence that we learned about the name Kitetsu for the metal from Koala, because it was in weapons smuggled by Doflamingo in Dressrosa. Much like Kitetsu, amber lead, Hakuen, was a highly coveted metal that only came from one region, the country of Flevens. The amber lead ore was likewise absorbed by the trees and other plant life, making them all a beautiful shade of white. The people living in the country, exposed to the mineral, likewise absorbed it into their bodies, and eventually developed the so-called amber lead disease that made white blotches appear on their skin, turned their hair bleach white, and shortened their lifespan. The effect was cumulative over generations, with each developing the symptoms and dying younger and younger. The name amber lead on its own is a pretty good hint. Amber is a material that forms from the resin of trees, kinda like the Lunarians got their Kitetsu from Sunlight Tree Eve. Amber is an orangish yellow color, and so you would expect amber lead to be yellow, right? Yet it was of a pure white color. In fact, it was precisely this pure white color that was the reason for it being so sought after. Likewise, there might be yet another pun to Kitetsu. You see, ki can also mean yellow, and this can funnily explain how Wano came to be known as the land of gold. Imagine rumors spread out that Wano is where all the Kitetsu comes from. Yet, not knowing how the word is supposed to be written, some people assume its name means yellow iron. At that point, some people likely think, wait, yellow iron, are they talking about gold? Damn, so one is where all the gold's at. Like amber lead was not amber but instead a pure white, so was our yellow iron, likely also in its base form a pure shade of white. Yet amber lead and Kitetsu are not just straight parallels but two sides of the same coin, and this is where the parallels turn into inversions. For both of them, the effects of the metal being absorbed by the body were cumulative over the generations, eventually turning their hair bleach white. Yet, whereas amber lead accumulated in the people of Flevens, turning their skin white and making every successive generation weaker, Kitetsu accumulated in the Lunarians, turning their skin dark and making every successive generation stronger. Wait, what did Oda mean by this? Was this what Usopp was talking about with afros all along? Even Adam trees, obviously, get their names from the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden from Genesis in the Bible. The Garden of Eden is described in Genesis as a paradise where the source of 4 rivers flows from. Likewise, Eve tree sits between paradise and the New World, the two halves of the Grand Line, where the 4 blues flow into via Reverse Mountain. In Genesis, Adam and Eve are cast out of paradise for committing the original sin, eating fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil that stood in the Garden of Eden. Likewise, eating fruit from Sunlight Tree Eve of paradise that connected the underworld and the heavens above, and thus absorbing a material from hell, turned the angel-like Lunarians into fallen angels, white-haired, black-winged, and controlling the flames of hell. So I said Kitetsu in its base form is likely white, right? Yet the Kitetsu swords are not, neither are the poneglyphs or sea stone. So Kitetsu in its base form is likely white, but gets darker and likely even turns different colors upon becoming infused with Ki. So the Kitetsu that accumulated on the hair strands of Lunarians turned their hair silvery white, yet the Kitetsu on their bodies absorbed their Ki and became darker, giving them their dark skin and black wings. This is because their bodies slowly over the generations adapted to draw out the Ki from their bodies to reinforce it, in a similar way to how Enma can draw out the user's Ki more than the Haki they are consciously outputting. A nice parallel when you consider Zoro's fight with King was largely about him figuring out King's Lunarian powers and simultaneously taming Enma. See, their skin becomes black, similar to armament hardening. The similarity is deliberate, because the Lunarian invulnerability is basically like a passive armament hardening. The Lunarians have two states, one in which they are invulnerable and have flames on their back, yet are not very agile, and one in which they are vulnerable, yet are much faster, and have no flames on their backs. Basically, the Kitetsu on their bodies always is saturated with ki, but it can also actively channel their ki like Enma, bonding together like an armament hardening, or not. When it is channeling ki as hardening, the Lunarian becomes incredibly resistant, obviously, yet the hardening all over the body restricts their movements, kinda like what we see happening with Tekai, Iron Body. So to use their full speed, they have to turn it off, something their bodies adapted to be able to do on will. Yet, what is it with the flames? When Koala mentions Kitetsu as a material for the first time, this happens on Baltigo, with its bleach-white landscape, with Sabo creating flames nearby. There's likely another reason than Kitetsu coming from the fiery underworld for it also being known as Pyroblime, with pyro meaning fire. You see, in the Haki Foundations video, I say that Kitetsu will only naturally absorb Haki, but not the breath of things in general, as Haki is a natural, and in general things are already in their naturally occurring state. Yet after likely billions of years in the underworld, surrounded by hot, fiery magma, it's perfectly plausible that all Kitetsu became, to some extent, attuned to the breath of the fiery Mímameiðr underworld, and carries the potential to bring out this breath, or to attune other ki that it interacts with to this breath. And so, for example, people that adapted to having Kitetsu in their bodies to use it to draw out their haki naturally might also have evolved to have the Kitetsu attune their haki to the breath of the fiery Mímameiðr underworld, resulting in their flame conjuring ability. And yes, I am stressing the magma aspect of this underworld flames, because when King's flame conjuring started to reach its highest levels, Zoro noted that the flames were just like magma. So when the Lunarians have the Kitetsu in their bodies channel their ki for their passive armament hardening ability, some of it also gets attuned to this fiery breath, resulting in the flames on their backs, which then go out when they are not using the Kitetsu to channel out their ki. To some extent, and this part is not quite as clear to me, King seemed able to even channel the energy from strikes he received into flames. The clearest example is when Zoro strikes him in the stomach, a strike that King seemingly was expecting, wanting even. He thanks it, saying jackpot, and then lets out a huge explosion, almost like his reinforced Kitetsu body used the kinetic energy and maybe even the haki it just received and turned it into fire. So if Kitetsu, aka Pyroblime, is why the Lunarians became like fallen angels, why are the people of Skypiea living on clouds made of Pyroblime just normal? Yet there's good reason to believe the people of Skypiea and the plant life and animal life on Angel Island were not under the full effects of Pyroblime. In Upper Yard, Skypiea, Robin theorizes that the animals and plants of Upper Yard, the part of Jaya that got shot up to Skypiea, got so large because the substance in the sea and island clouds, Pyroblime, which we know is Kitetsu, abnormally enhances their growth rate. Yet none of the plant life or animal life of Angel Island was gigantified, only that of Upper Yard. While in the same chapter, Genfall explains why Earth is so valuable to them. Plants can grow on island clouds, but new plants cannot germinate. It seems that though Pyroblime allows the plants to grow, it does not contain all the nutrients they need, at least not to reproduce. So there are two different ways to explain this that I can see. One, the plants normally cannot grow without the nutrients on the earth, but the gigantifying properties of the Pyroblime allow them to grow to a regular size. Essentially, the effects of poor nutrition and gigantification cancel each other out. Two,
and I find this slightly more plausible. In the lack of nutrients from Earth, the plants can absorb the pyrobloin and decompose it into various nutrients, just not all that the plant needs to reproduce. As such, no surplus of pyrobloin is left on the plants for gigantism and such. In both of these scenarios, the same applies to the animals and people that then consume those plants. The point is, for the effects of kitetsu consumption, such as gigantism, to manifest, both the kitetsu and earth are needed, so that plant or animal life can get an adequate nutrition and still be left with a surplus of kitetsu in their bodies for those effects to manifest. There seems to be some different ways that life forms adapt to having kitetsu in their bodies. Dials adapted to be able to store and release the breath or ki of different things. Lunarians adapted to be able to use their own ki to reinforce their body as a passive armament hardening and to conjure flames with magma properties. The cloud wolves on Upper Yard showed no visible change as far as I can tell, yet the most common adaptation seems to be simply gigantism. Perhaps most animal and plant life use that extra reinforcement that kitetsu can bring, like what we see with the Lunarians, to sustain a much larger body. That's likely what happened to the giants of Elbaf as well, who could have gotten so large by consuming kitetsu-infused fruit from Treasure Tree Adam. We see that the Lunarians and even the Seraphim also tend to be much larger than the other winged people like the Shandians, yet nowhere near as large as the giants, as they adapted to use kitetsu mainly for invulnerability rather than gigantism. Gigantism associated with kitetsu consumption might also be the key to the experiments with gigantism we see happening in Punk Hazard. As we know, Caesar Clown was following the research he did with Vegapunk, and Vegapunk knows how to work with pyrobloin, aka kitetsu. So feeding the kids kitetsu with the candy might have been the key to his project of gigantifying the kids in Punk Hazard. These gigantifying properties of kitetsu probably would also explain how Adam and Eve got so goddamn large as well. Eve seems to be from the same species as the mangroves of Sabori that were already pretty goddamn large, yet nowhere near as ridiculous as Eve. Eve originally was likely just a mangrove tree like the ones in Sabori, that had its roots eventually reach a magma chamber and nurture itself from it, growing to its epic proportions due to the gigantifying properties of kitetsu. This is probably what happened to Adam as well. That seems to be, from its looks at least, from a completely different tree species. I'm gonna guess an ash tree, since Yggdrasil was supposed to be an ash tree. Adam was likely just one particularly large ash tree. Then its roots reached magma and it grew to a ridiculous size. The presence of kitetsu in Adam can also explain why its wood is incredibly strong, either from kitetsu reinforcing the tree using the tree's own energy, or maybe from the people of Elbaf infusing Adam with armament haki to strengthen and protect it, a reinforcement that would remain permanently infused in the kitetsu. On a more speculative note, kitetsu-induced gigantism might also have happened to the cherry blossom tree in the flower capital of Wano, as Wano is where all the kitetsu is from and the tree is even relatively close to Mount Fuji and all of that. And on an even more speculative note, if somehow Zunisha's ridiculous size has anything to do with kitetsu, then maybe the whale tree was just one particular tree whose roots actually pierced Zunisha's skin and started nurturing itself from Zunisha's blood, and thus also getting gigantified from the kitetsu in Zunisha's blood. Maybe that sounds a little bit too metal, but people who could hear Zunisha's voice via the ability of hearing the voice of all things, seem to think Zunisha's voice somehow got louder when they came close to the whale tree, which seems to imply the whale tree and Zunisha are kind of fused in some weird way. Now, if the whale tree did get gigantified by kitetsu, and if it bore any fruit that the minks ate, then Sulong might be the minks' particular adaptation to having kitetsu in their bodies, which might be why their hair turns white like the Lunarians. Maybe they can use the kitetsu to draw out their energy at a faster rate than what would normally be possible, which could explain both their increased agility and strength and also the heavy toll Sulong has on their stamina. Anyways, I'm not too sure about this last one specifically.
Anyways, I hope I could explain what I wanted about the Ancient Kingdom and the Lunarians and their connection to the Shandians. Now, finally, we have all the groundwork done for my theory on devil fruits. So next video I will finally explain devil fruits. What they are, how they were created, why they behave the way they do, why they are called devil fruits, what is awakening, why haki is their natural counter, etc. I will also be explaining the Kaboutermen, Black Blades, and why the Ancient Kingdom was known as the Country of Gods. I'm very excited for that one, as it will be one where a lot of stuff I have been setting up with these GUST videos will finally come fully together. Anyways, I hope you liked this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and ciao!